Colorful outfits like this
To try Silly String.
Back in the 1970s, America had some weird laws. Think of strolling down the street with your furry friend without a diaper, or daring to don roller skates in a public restroom. Both big no's.
Of course, this year's hot fashion news was the arrival of hot pants.
And if you want to relax in a bathtub, make sure it has legs, or you might be breaking the law. And don't even think about cruising in a black car on Sundays or carrying an ice cream cone in your pocket. It's against the rules. And if you're under 18, forget about playing pinball.
You're about to witness for the first time a kid attempt to play pinball with his feet. Are you ready, sir? Go!
From wearing hot pants to flirting with flags, frowning at cops to slurping soup, these quirky laws had everyone scratching their heads. So if you were living in the 70s, you'd better watch out for 20 weird things of the 1970s that were illegal. Number 1. Walking a dog without a diaper. In the 1970s in some cities, it was downright illegal to walk your dog without a diaper. Yep, you heard it right. Dogs were expected to wear diapers to prevent any unexpected messes on the public streets. This quirky law aimed to maintain cleanliness in urban areas, but it also sparked a lot of chuckles and head scratching among pet owners. Imagine taking your furry friend for a stroll and having to wrestle them into a diaper first. While it might sound odd today, back then it was a serious matter enforced by local authorities. Doggy fashion took on a whole new meaning as owners scrambled to comply with this unusual regulation. Thankfully, this law eventually went the way of disco balls and bell-bottoms, but it remains a curious footnote in the history of pet ownership regulations. As the leash clicks onto your dog's collar, what other wacky laws shape daily life? Have you ever wondered why roller skates were off limits in public restrooms? Number 2. Wearing roller skates in public restrooms. Wearing roller skates in public restrooms was actually banned in some places. Well, it all came down to safety concerns due to crowded restrooms, slippery floors, and folks zipping around on wheels. It was a recipe for disaster. Authorities worried about accidents and injuries, so they put the kibosh on roller skating in these confined spaces. While it might seem like a strange rule, it was meant to prevent mishaps and keep everyone safe. Imagine trying to navigate your way to the restroom stall while dodging skaters whizzing by. It's not exactly the most pleasant bathroom experience. This law may have dampened the roller disco trend, but it also ensured that restroom visits were a bit less chaotic. And so the next time you lace up your skates, remember to steer clear of those public bathrooms unless you want to risk breaking the law. Number 3. Installing bathtubs without legs. Back then, believe it or not, in certain places, it was illegal to install bathtubs without legs. The reasoning behind this rule was supposed to prevent bathtubs from sitting directly on the floor. The idea was that having legs would allow for better ventilation underneath the tub and prevent moisture buildup, which could lead to mold and other unsanitary conditions. Although it may sound odd today, back then, lawmakers took these matters seriously. Homeowners had to ensure their bathtubs complied with this requirement, or else they risked running afoul of the law. So if you were planning a bathroom renovation in the 70s, you'd better make sure your bathtub had legs. Otherwise, you might find yourself in hot water with the authorities. As you ponder the legless peculiarities of past regulations, did you know that in some places, driving a black car on Sundays was taboo? Number 4. Driving a black car on Sundays. Driving a black car on Sundays was actually banned in some areas. Why this strange restriction? Well, it all stemmed from a belief that cars, especially black ones, disrupted the traditional day of rest. In certain communities, Sunday was considered a sacred day meant for relaxation and worship, and the sight of cars zipping around was seen as contrary to that ideal. So authorities decided to crack down on black cars specifically, perhaps because they were more noticeable or associated with luxury and excess. It was a curious rule that left many scratching their heads, especially those who owned black cars and wanted to go for a Sunday drive. This law eventually faded away as attitudes toward leisure and transportation evolved, but it remains a reminder of the cultural norms of the time. Number 5. Carrying ice cream cones in your pocket. In the 1970s, some states had an odd law on the books. It was illegal to carry ice cream cones in your back pocket. Sounds bizarre, right? Well, the reasoning behind this rule was even stranger. Legend has it that in rural areas, mischievous pranksters would sneakily put ice cream cones in their pockets and stroll around town, because supposedly, horses would be enticed by the sweet treat and follow the person home. While it might seem like something out of a comedy sketch, this law was taken seriously in certain communities. Carrying ice cream cones in your back pocket wasn't just seen as a harmless act of dessert smuggling, it was considered a potential hazard for causing chaos on the streets. Although it's unclear how often this law was enforced, it certainly adds a flavorful twist to the peculiarities of 70s legislation. After you reflect on the quirky laws of carrying ice cream cones in your pocket, did you know that singing in a swimsuit was once frowned upon in certain locales? How did such whimsical regulations shape social norms? Number 6. Singing in a swimsuit. During the 1970s in the USA, singing in a swimsuit could land you in hot water in some places. Certain jurisdictions had laws against belting out tunes while sporting your beach attire. The rationale behind this peculiar prohibition varied, but it often stemmed from a desire to maintain decorum in public spaces. Some authorities believed that singing in a swimsuit was indecent or disruptive to the peace and tranquility of recreational areas. Think of wanting to serenade your friends by the poolside and suddenly realize you're breaking the law. It may sound like a scene from a wacky comedy, but these laws were taken seriously at the time. Whether it was to uphold modesty or prevent public disturbances, singing in a swimsuit was off limits in certain corners of the country during the groovy 70s. It was just one of the many curious regulations that colored the legal landscape of the era. Number 7. Playing pinball if under 18. In the funky era of the 70s, playing pinball wasn't all fun and games for everyone. Believe it or not, in certain places, if you were under 18, you were banned from indulging in this arcade pastime.
Many have wondered what would come next. Whatever it is, it will certainly make obsolete everything that's come before.
It boiled down to concerns about morality and juvenile delinquency. Authorities believed that pinball, with its flashy lights and fast-paced action, could lead young people astray, distracting them from more wholesome activities.
This brainchild of the boffins has created a new disease, the slot machine fever.
As a result, they implemented laws prohibiting minors from partaking in pinball wizardry. Imagine being a teenager itching to rack up points on the pinball machine, only to find out you're breaking the law.
This gentleman claims he can play pinball without a quarter. We don't think so. Are you ready, sir?
While it might seem like an overreaction today, it was a serious matter back then. These laws aimed to protect the youth from what some saw as the perils of pinball, adding a curious twist to the landscape of 70s-era regulations. Number 8. Wearing hot pants in public parks. Wearing hot pants in public parks was a fashion statement that could land you in trouble in some places. Hot pants, those ultra-short shorts that were all the rage back then, were deemed too revealing for certain public areas. Authorities in some jurisdictions believed that these skimpy bottoms crossed the line of decency, prompting them to enact laws against their public display. Envision wanting to soak up the sun or enjoy a picnic in your favorite pair of hot pants, only to find out you're breaking the law. Although it might sound restrictive by today's standards, back then, it was seen as a way to maintain modesty and uphold community standards.
Don't you think girls are showing a bit too much of themselves in them?
No, not really. I tell you, if I was slim enough, I'd wear a pair.
These laws added an interesting layer to the cultural landscape of the 70s, reflecting the ongoing debates about appropriate attire and public decorum during that colorful era.
The Hot Pants Award for the oldest contestant in the contest. Miss Williams, how old are you?
72.
But why stop there? Now let's uncover the surprising reasons behind laws against spitting on the sidewalk. Number 9. Spitting on the sidewalk. Back then, spitting on the sidewalk was more than just bad manners, it was actually against the law in many cities. Why the strict stance on something as seemingly harmless as spitting? Well, it all came down to public health concerns. At the time, diseases like tuberculosis were still prevalent, and authorities feared that spitting on the sidewalk could spread harmful germs and bacteria. To combat this, they enacted ordinances to discourage spitting in public places. Violators could face fines or even arrest for this seemingly innocuous act. Imagine walking down the street, minding your own business, only to be slapped with a ticket for spitting out your gum. It might sound extreme, but these laws were part of a broader effort to promote cleanliness and hygiene in urban areas. They serve as a reminder of the public health priorities of the 70s and the measures taken to safeguard the well-being of citizens. Let's not spit on the sidewalks, but could you flirt using flags? Would it affect the public decorum and increase the potential for misunderstandings? Number 10. Flirting using flags. In the funky 70s, flirting had its own set of rules, and in some towns, using flags for flirtatious communication was a big no-no. Certain jurisdictions actually had laws against using flags to send romantic signals. The reasoning behind this prohibition was likely rooted in concerns about public decorum and the potential for misunderstandings. Back then, using flags to convey messages was a common practice, especially among sailors and those involved in maritime activities. However, some local authorities saw this as inappropriate, particularly when it came to matters of the heart. Imagine trying to catch someone's eye with a fluttering flag, only to find out you're breaking the law. Though it might seem like a whimsical way to express affection, these laws were taken seriously at the time. They add a colorful twist to the tapestry of 70s-era regulations during the unique cultural attitudes towards romance and communication during that era. Number 11. Frowning at police officers. During the 1970s, you had to watch your facial expressions around police officers in certain places because frowning at them could actually get you in trouble. Some areas had laws against frowning at law enforcement, deeming it disrespectful. It might seem like a strange rule, but it reflected a broader cultural emphasis on respect for authority figures. Maintaining a positive demeanor towards police was considered essential for promoting social order and cooperation with law enforcement. While enforcement of this law might have been sporadic, its existence highlights the unique social norms of the time. Frowning at police officers may seem like a harmless expression of discontent today, but in the 70s, it was considered a serious breach of etiquette and could land you in hot water with the law. Frowning at the police makes sense, but how did seemingly harmless actions like frowning or feeding pigeons become illegal? Number 12. Feeding pigeons. Feeding pigeons might seem like a harmless pastime, but in many cities, it was actually against the law. While authorities were concerned about the growing pigeon population and the mess they left behind, pigeons were notorious for flocking to areas where they could find food, and feeding them only exacerbated the problem. Cities struggled with pigeon droppings dirtying public spaces and damaging buildings, not to mention the potential health hazards associated with large concentrations of birds. As a result, laws were put into place to discourage people from feeding pigeons. While it might seem harsh, these laws were intended to control the pigeon population and maintain cleanliness in urban areas. They're just one example of the unconventional regulations that colored the legal landscape of the 70s. Number 13. Jumping off buildings. During the 70s, New York had an oddly specific law. It was illegal to jump off a building. Leaping off skyscrapers was against the law, and remarkably, this law still exists today. While it might seem like common sense to avoid such dangerous behavior, the fact that it needed to be explicitly stated in the law is quite intriguing. The law likely originated from concerns about public safety and preventing reckless behavior that could endanger both the jumper and those below. Jumping off buildings, especially in densely populated urban areas like New York City, pose serious risks not only to the individual, but also to bystanders and property. Despite its seemingly straightforward nature, this law serves as a reminder of the sometimes unusual regulations that find their way onto the books and endure over time, preserving the curious legal legacy of the 1970s. Number 14. Slurping soup. proper dining etiquette took center stage, even to the point of regulating how you ate your soup. In some parts of New Jersey, slurping soup was actually against the law. Indulging in a noisy slurp could land you in hot water. The rationale behind this unusual regulation was to maintain decorum and uphold social standards during mealtime. While slurping might be a common practice in some cultures, it was seen as disruptive and impolite in certain communities. Conceive of eagerly digging into a bowl of hot soup, only to remember that you had to sip silently to avoid breaking the law. Although it might seem trivial compared to more serious offenses, this law reflects the meticulous attention to manners and propriety that characterized the era. So if you found yourself in New Jersey during the 70s, you'd better mind your manners and keep your slurping to a minimum to avoid running afoul of the law. Well, you could not slurp soup, but could you connect to the internet without permission? Number 15, connecting to the internet without permission. In that era, the internet was just starting to take its first steps, and with it came a curious legal quirk. Connecting to the internet without permission could actually be illegal.
For years, phone and help centers were used by technically inclined users. Now, 80% of IBM's calls come from so-called newbies.
Even though the internet was still in its infancy during this time, unauthorized access to network services was considered a serious offense.
Can you explain what internet is?
That little mark with the A and then the ring around it?
At?
See, that's what I said.
The few existing computer networks were mostly confined to research institutions and government agencies, and accessing them without proper authorization was strictly prohibited. The internet was still far from the ubiquitous presence it is today.
Information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house.
However, these early laws laid the groundwork for the digital regulations and cybersecurity measures that would follow in the decades to come, shaping the evolving landscape of technology and legality. Number 16, barking dogs. In the colorful 70s, even a man's best friend was subject to some peculiar laws. In certain cities, it was actually illegal for dogs to bark after 6 p.m. Canine chatter was strictly regulated, especially during the evening hours. The reasoning behind this curious regulation likely stemmed from concerns about noise disturbance and preserving the peace and quiet of residential neighborhoods. Let's say you're trying to enjoy a peaceful evening at home, only to be constantly serenaded by a chorus of barking dogs. It might seem like an odd restriction, but it reflects the efforts of local authorities to maintain harmony within communities. Enforcement of this law may have varied from place to place, but its existence adds a quirky twist to the legal landscape of the 70s. So if you had a yappy pup in the 70s, you might have had to keep a close eye on the clock to ensure they didn't break the law with their nighttime barking. Number 17, using silly string. In that groovy era, you might have found yourself in a sticky situation if you were caught using the silly string in certain towns. This playful party favorite was banned in some places due to the mess it created and its potential for vandalism. Silly string, with its colorful stringy spray, was a popular novelty item at parties and celebrations. But authorities in some jurisdictions weren't too keen on its aftermath. They were concerned about the stringy mess it left behind, which could be difficult to clean up, especially in public spaces. Additionally, some mischievous individuals saw silly string as a tool for vandalism, spraying it on buildings, vehicles, and other property. Visualize being in the middle of a festive celebration only to realize that your favorite party accessory could land you in trouble with the law. Although it might seem like a lighthearted ban, it reflected concerns about maintaining cleanliness and preventing property damage in communities across the country during the 70s. Number 18, hanging obstructions from the rearview mirror. Even the accessories hanging from your rearview mirror could get you into trouble. It was actually illegal to hang obstructions from your rearview mirror if they could potentially block the driver's view. This law aimed to promote safety on the roads by ensuring the drivers had a clear and unobstructed view of the traffic ahead. While hanging fuzzy dice or air fresheners might seem like harmless decorations, they could become dangerous if they interfere with the driver's ability to see the road properly. Imagine yourself cruising down the highway only to realize that your favorite trinket could land you a ticket. Although it might seem like a minor infraction, this law reflected broader efforts to enhance road safety during the 70s. Hence, if you were a fan of accessorizing your car's interior, you had to be mindful of the law and choose decoration that wouldn't compromise your visibility while driving. Though hanging obstructions from the rearview mirror was illegal, what about painting polka dots on the American flag? Was it illegal as well? Number 19. Painting polka dots on the American flag. Patriotism was paramount, and any alteration of the American flag was a serious matter. Painting polka dots or making modifications to the flag was strictly prohibited by the law. The flag was revered as a symbol of national unity and pride, and any disrespectful depiction of it was considered an affront to the values it represented. Whether it was painting polka dots, altering the design, or using the flag for commercial purposes, any deviation from the standard flag protocol was met with legal consequences. Freedom of expression is a cherished value in the United States, but the sanctity of the flag was protected by laws aiming at upholding its dignity and significance. So if you wanted to show your patriotism in the 70s, you had to do it within the boundaries of flag etiquette to avoid running afoul of the law. Number 20. Having a couch on your porch. In the 70s, having a cozy couch on your porch might seem like a laid-back way to enjoy the outdoors, but in certain college towns, it was actually against the law. Having upholstered furniture outside, including couches, was strictly prohibited in some areas. The reason behind this curious regulation was concern over fire hazards, particularly in college towns where student housing was prevalent. It might seem like a quirky restriction, however, it reflected the efforts of local authorities to prioritize public safety and reduce the risk of fires in densely populated areas. And so, if you were living in a college town during the 70s, you had to find other ways to furnish your porch without breaking the law.